Hello there. Hi. So yeah, my name's Ken Westin, and today I'm going to be talking about the insider threat kill chain, detecting human indicators of compromise. So real quick, just a little bit about me. One thing when I was researching insider threat is that I learned I am the insider threat. In a lot of ways, actually, when you profile someone who could be an insider, all the fingers pointed to me. So it was kind of interesting. I actually developed a website called usbhacks.com that focused on USB-based exploits back in the day of good old Microsoft Autorun, and some other interesting things at the time around the weaknesses around USB. Had a lot of tools that were available and talked about and discussed. That actually turned into a product called Gadget Track, which was theft recovery software. Started with USB devices. I couldn't quit there. Moved into laptops and mobile phones. Basically gather information to track down where the device is, take photos of the person, and ended up putting a lot of people in jail. Learned quite a bit about that, not just about recovering stolen devices, but also some of the research that goes around it using open source data, having to go out and build some tools to go scan for additional information. Through that, I also developed a product called Camera Trace. It's basically a distributed EXIF scanner search engine. Goes out and indexes websites. You do a search for serial numbers, and then it'll show you any photos were taken with that particular camera. So I'm currently a Tripwire security analyst in product marketing. I focus on log intelligence and forensics. And there's some of my information here. So your organization's greatest asset is also its greatest risk, and I think that's really where the insider threat issue is really problematic. It's the very people that are within the organization. So a little experience here. I was working for a company, and we'd hired an administrator to help out with hardening some servers. Come to find out, there was a disagreement with management about his billing. He was overcharging us, and they caught it. They confronted him with it. And thing is, the management and HR, they didn't tell anyone else in IT. And I was in charge of the website at the time, and at 3 in the morning one day, I started getting these alerts that the website was down. I log into the server, and I come to find out, just doing some quick analysis and looking at log files and some of the file changes, that he actually purposely logged into the server, shut the server down, modified a bunch of the HTTP config files for Apache, and made it so that even if you reboot the server, it wouldn't come back up. I was able to fix it pretty quickly, but it was really interesting is once I was able to get the information, actually started seeing some of the emails that were exchanged with him, it mapped to the timeline perfectly. And if management could have told us that there was this issue, that there was a potential risk, then we could have mitigated this by either removing his access or at least reducing his privileges. So you guys may have heard about the another case, a network admin who was on he was actually on a aircraft carrier. He got busted for hacking. And there was a whole list of website or servers that he had gotten into. And it's really interesting is that, on a nuclear submarine, you'd think that they would have, pretty good protocols and security policies in place to mitigate things like this. But apparently they didn't. He was able to download all these different tools. I mean, even something as simple as Nmap should fire off alerts within your organization. If you start seeing some anomalous traffic and scans, that should be an alert as well. And this guy was able to do this for years before he actually got caught. And he wasn't even caught on the boat itself. It was actually when he tried to hack into another Navy server that they were able to catch him. So it's not just, in military, but also in financial services. This is an administrator. He was actually hired by Fannie Mae. He got fired because he made a configuration error, change in error that caused damage to some systems. The HR department decided to let him go back to his desk and finish the rest of the day after they fired him. He had admin access to the company's 4,000 servers. He wrote a logic bomb to disable logins and wipe logs on a specific date and time. Luckily, after he left, another engineer had found that code before it could actually execute. The guy was sentenced to 41 months in prison. What's really scary, though, is that after he was working there, before he actually went to jail, he'd worked for Bank of America, Amtrak, and GE, all as senior system administrator with highly privileged access. So when I look at the insider threat, I like to look at their intentions. If you look at any sort of risk analysis, they always measure threat as a product of capability and intent. And CERT, they have an insider threat division, and they actually looked at real cases, and they found that motivation is 37% of it's fraud, and that's usually someone trying to get financial gain. Right? They're not there to cause damage to the systems; they just want more money. And those types of insiders are going to be entrenched for a long period of time, and usually their fraud is going to be something that happens over a course of months or years. Then you had IT sabotage, and that's usually going to be a short time, or someone who's planning on leaving, maybe someone that got passed over for a promotion. And then you have intellectual property theft. That can be someone who's on the inside. Sometimes developers, right? They feel like they co-own source code, so before they leave an organization, they may help themselves to a code repository. Same thing with sales. They may log into their Salesforce account or other systems and download a great deal of information. And then, of course, you have espionage, which can be corporate or it can also be state-sponsored. But it's really interesting, though, is if you start looking at this, depending on what their intent is, they're going to have different indicators, and you need to deal with them differently. So the insider threat kill chain, we're all familiar with kill chains, but that doesn't really work well for an insider threat because we're dealing with someone who's not necessarily a hacker trying to get in from outside. What we're dealing with is someone who has authorized credentials to do unauthorized things. So we have to take this from a different approach. And CISO at the FBI actually did a presentation. He talked about what he called the insider threat kill chain. I like this model a lot better. It starts with basically the recruitment or tipping point. So this can be where someone on the outside has paid someone or maybe given them a job offer, or they've accepted a job offer, and it would be helpful for them to have some additional information from a competitor. Or it's the tipping point. It's where they get frustrated. They're pissed off. They got passed over for that promotion. They're complaining to everyone around them about how they don't get paid enough. They hate their manager, right? So then the next phase is the search and recon phase where, they're actually looking for what information can they grab. If they're a privileged insider or a tech-savvy insider, this might also be a point where they're trying to run vulnerability scans inside the network, which is quite common. Even running something as simple as Nmap just to get a map of the network. Then they'll actually start doing the acquisition and collection of information. Then, of course, we'll have the exfiltration or the actual action where they actually try to cause damage. And sort of through these different phases, there's different things we can do to defend ourselves. So usually when it comes to the prevention side, it's not real technical. There's not a whole lot that you can do. It's the same thing as if you're dealing with an adversary who's doing recon on your company, right? You can't really detect that until they actually touch the network in some fashion. So this is usually something where you're going to have HR policies. You're going to, make sure that there's clear lines of communication with HR and IT. If there is going to be a rift, if there's going to be layoffs, if there is a group of employees that they think is at risk, behavioral problems, all this type of information should be shared. And you would be surprised how few HR and IT departments actually communicate with each other. And it's really interesting as if just even casual conversations or monthly meetings, it can actually do quite a bit to at least understand how things work and how they can go in and actually flag some of these high-risk employees. Then, of course, we'll have technical indicators, which I'll get to a little bit as well. So all along the way, usually there's an indicator when they're trying to access servers or that they don't have access to, trying to escalate their privileges. There's going to be information that will appear in logs. So some things we can look at for on the prevention side for human indicators of compromise. So these are things that like your HR department are going to watch for. Someone who's consistently first in and last out of the office, that's usually showing a sign of wanting to be in control. They don't want other people to view their work. 12 months of unused vacation, life change, it can be a marital status change. If they give notice, there's a layoff, passed over for promotion, or disciplinary action. So not all these are going to say that, yeah, this person is an insider threat, but these are things that can show increased risk. And also on the vacation side, it's not necessarily that person, it could be that they don't want to take vacation because they don't want someone else to review their work. But it can also be that someone else is using their credentials on the inside. So some things that like HR and legal can do is consider threats from insiders and partners in risk assessments. I think we have a tendency to think about penetration testing as the malicious hacker from outside again. But if we start actually considering the insider in our risk assessments and how we model our networks, then it can actually make a huge impact to reduce risk. Make sure you do background checks. CERT did another study, and they found that a lot of folks that were actually doing insider type crimes actually had records, and simply running background checks on some of those folks, they're going to have privileged access, might be a good idea depending on where you work. You want to clearly document and enforce policies and controls. That's important, at least, especially if you have monitoring in place. You'd be amazed at the impact that it can have on your organization if people think they're being watched, even if they're not. You want to have periodic security awareness training for all your employees. Monitor and respond to suspicious or disruptive behavior, again, more on the HR side. Anticipate and manage negative workplace issues. So, if there is financial issues in the company or there's going to be rift, again, that's something that you need to keep into consideration. Track and secure your physical environment. You can have the best IT security in the world, but if you don't lock your server room, yeah, bad stuff. I'll talk about an actual case that happened at Los Alamos around that. Establish clear lines of communication and procedures between HR, legal, and IT, kind of what we've been talking about. So then there's actual technical indicators. So these are things that we can actually track on the technology side. If we're seeing that there's an increased number of logins, variation of remote and local, something might be up. If they're logging in a network at odd times, again, late at night, that might be another indicator. CERT did a study too where they found the majority of the attacks they saw were remote logins via VPN and then exfiltrating data out over SSH or RDP to a remote server. And then we'll talk a little bit how you can actually detect that in a basic SIM. Logging in frequently during vacation times, again, may not be an indicator that this person is the attacker. It might be someone with one of their business partners. Remote logging using by different employee credentials. So if you see that, on one system that's usually, it's owned by one particular person and then other credentials are used on that device, that's a big red flag right there. Changes in websites that are visited, work versus personal. Someone who's hitting Facebook and LinkedIn and Glassdoor a little bit more than usual. That might be something you want to keep an eye on. Increased printer usage as well. Be amazed how many people don't actually log what gets printed. That's actually a really good indicator that some information might be leaving your environment. Look for any sort of export of large reports, downloads from internal systems. So you should be monitoring if someone's going into Salesforce, downloading large reports, large chunks of data. These are things you want to monitor. Trying to keep an eye on time here. Then policy and technology. You want to implement strict password and account policies, enforce separation of duties and least privilege. I think a lot of this stuff, it's pretty common knowledge in IT security, but you'd be surprised how many of this sometimes gets overlooked. So, the thing is, we have all this data that's available to us, and, it tells us a lot of information about what's going on inside the network. But it's really difficult to make sense of it unless we actually look at it as a whole. So, monitoring an employee, what devices are accessing, what information they have access to, this is all critical for us to be able to establish if we actually do have an insider threat. And, the first thing you want to do is be able to act on that information in real time. So if an employee tries to access a server that they're not authorized to view, that's something you want to trigger an alert right away. That needs to be passed up to the SOC, or it needs to be emailed to an admin, depending on the size of your organization. So that's stuff that you want to be able to do in real time. And you can do that through your typical SIM, open source SIMs. There's logging tools that are out there. I think most people have some sort of a SIM or some sort of a log intelligence tool in their environment that they can take advantage of. Splunk is another good one that can do some of this. And from that, you can do your alerts. You can do mobile notifications. You can even activate scripts. You can go in and actually deactivate someone's account, for example. Then you want to be able to have the analytics and forensics and storage capability. So that's really important to be able to go back and actually, you detect something happened. You want to go back and look at that person's behavior. What else did they do? What other files did they touch? Was this the only information they've stolen, or is this something they've been doing for a long period of time? And you're going to need to have that information, not just to go back and identify, where you need to remediate, but also for law enforcement. And if there's an HR issue, then you're going to get legal involved as well. And you need to make sure you have that information and that it's valid. So when people ask what to log first, I always say firewalls, your unsuccessful login attempts, IDS. IDS should be deployed not just on the outside and the perimeter, but also inside. Actually, I've got an example of where Nmap can be detected if someone's running an internal scan. If Joe in accounting is running Nmap scans, that might be a little questionable. You want to look at web proxies, antivirus alerts, and then any sort of anything around change management, any configuration changes. You want to determine your log volume to start out with. I'm going to skip over this because I want to get to some of the good stuff. So there's correlation rules that you can set up. So this is pretty much any SIM will allow you to do this. It's going to be in different formats, but log-on attempts from terminated employees or contractors, odd remote log-on patterns from employees, any sort of anomalous behavior with that deals with log-ons and authentication from your employees or trusted business partners. If an employee disables antivirus, that gets logged. That's something you can watch for. An employee visits blocked websites frequently. If he downloads a large file from the internet or CRM, and you can usually detect that. Good. So if employee installs and uses Tor on a company system, or if they're installing any sort of scanning or hacking tools. So let's log a real problem here. So if an employee behavior shows potential risk to the business, I want to monitor to see if he connects to servers outside the network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up rules and alert on connections to outgoing ports after hours on port 22, 23, and 3389. So this was CERT, when they did their research, they actually found that this was a common attack pattern. So this is really easy to implement. This is in CEE. It's an open source format that you can actually import into most SIMs. At TripWire Log Center, we support it, or you can import this into ArcSight as well. And some of them have their own proprietary formats for this, but it's all going to be pretty similar. You can even create dashboards. So integrating your SIM directly with Active Directory will help get a lot of this information for you. So this is my watch list where I'm actually watching terminated employees and logons. I can actually watch for any sort of large file shares that get created. Let's see what else. Yeah, I'm also watching time of day, when the logons are, and all this information can be correlated, and it sort of increases their risk score as well. So I had one case study where we had a power company where they actually deployed our log intelligence tool, and they discovered that there was an account of a terminated system admin in use. He was logging into the network at 4 a.m. on a Wednesday. They also discovered that he'd gone in and disabled login on a key firewall. So we kind of wanted to know why would you want to be doing that? There was another one where we had a major tire retailer. They actually deployed both our log intelligence tool and file integrity monitoring. And they discovered that there was a backdoor account that was created by a terminated employee. So it wasn't just his account, but he had created several other accounts. So this is where you want to go backtrack and see, where did this person, what other activities has this person done, what other accounts has he created, and what have they done? So here's a example of what can get picked up by an IDS internally. You see this can be someone on the inside, maybe it's a hacker that got inside, or it can be an insider actually running those scans. So it's good to have an IDS set up on the inside. I also highly recommend a honeypot. It gets a little more technical, a little more legal gray area, but there's a lot of things that you can do there. For response, you want to implement secure backup recovery processes, quickly audit users' network behavior, and develop an insider incident response plan. And again, this needs to be interdepartmental. If IT is working alone on trying to detect the insider, there's going to be a lot of problems. So quick here. So this was USB hacks. I started that a while back. Actually used USB-based Trojans to recover stolen devices. It was a lot of fun. That technology was actually deployed to FLIR thermal imaging cameras. They actually did it for theft recovery and for export controls. But it's interesting is that there was a case in Los Alamos in 2006. An 18-year-old was hired and given security clearance to work at Los Alamos labs in a vault archiving data. There was a meth lab that got busted, and they found 3 flash drives that were that she brought work home. That's what it was for. Her boyfriend's the one that got busted for the meth lab. So the data went from one lab to another. What's interesting is how easy it was. She was able to just go in there. She brought flash drives in, plugged it in. No one watched her. No one searched her. And this was in a highly secure area. And she had access to was information on the nuclear tests that were done in the 70s. So they had a policy about no flash drives, but it was never enforced. So you can also log physical security, so key fob systems. That's another great tool. A lot of people don't think about that, but a lot of those devices generate logs. So one flash drive that I actually helped recover, we actually tracked it down to a university in North Texas, one particular computer lab. That lab also required a student ID to be swiped, so there was log data there. We also found that they had been robbed several times with the computers that were taken, and there was logs of a lot of the closed caption cameras log time as well. So we were able to correlate all this information, all this log data, and we had more than enough information for the police to be involved and get that device back and easily identify who took it. Lazy logging. If you want to, log your USB flash drives, you can actually. There's a technique to watch outbound proxy logs or your IPS. Anytime on Windows systems, when you connect a flash drive, it actually sends information out to these two URLs, so you can monitor that. And there's a link down here. I'll put my slides up, but they'll kind of explain how to go about doing that. And about 80% of the time, it's going to work. But it's something you can do quick and dirty just to detect flash drives that are being plugged into your environment. Some future threats. I've been thinking a lot about other things that people can do, be it Zigbee radios or rogue mesh networks that get put into an area. You're talking about highly technical, savvy folks. So I'm working with my friend Jared. He's helping with the HackRF project. Seeing how we can actually sniff out some of these rogue networks. If there's a Zigbee radio that's in there that shouldn't be, being able to at least detect that. And then take it a step further and actually get 3 devices and try to identify the location of the device. So, sorry I had to go really fast, but I only had a few minutes left. Great. I got 5 minutes, so if you guys have questions.